thank you so much for joining us today. So sorry about the technical difficulties. We are so glad you were able to connect and come on because this is going to be a fantastic session. So thank you again for your patience. My name is Jenny Alexandri, and I am joined by my colleague, Kirsten DeRoche-Weitzel. And we are so excited to be able to have the honor of facilitating the session for you and for Dr. Heidelberg. You've heard these housekeeping items before. I'm just going to review them quickly so we can get into the important stuff that Dr. Heidelberg has for us. As you know, you can access the presenter handouts for this session. Kirsten put them in the chat box, so you can click directly there. We'll be doing that a couple of times throughout just to make sure you guys have them. The bio, all that kind of information is on, you can access that through this link here that Kirsten just put into the chat. Again, because this is a Zoom, if you could please keep your microphone muted unless you wanted to talk, but we would like you to keep you are invited to put your microphones on if you like. We all had this discussion. It's nice sometimes to see people's reactions and things. So if you're comfortable with keeping your microphone on, your video on, that would be wonderful. And we are going to have a question and answering time, so a dedicated time at the end of the session for about 15 minutes. So Kirsten and I are going to collect all your questions on a Google document and then share them with Dr. Heidelberg. So without further ado, here is Dr. Heidelberg. Thank you, Dr. Heidelberg.
Yes, thank you all so much for that introduction. So I'm really excited that you all are just here today, and some of the individuals are back for a second round of the presentation. So that is great. Because now we're just, thank you, my amazing facilitators. Because now we're going to go into how do we do this? We just talked about the foundational. We got us all on the same page. You believe in this. So this is how we're going to do this. First, we need to understand this ecological perspective, which allows us to view a child as an active participant in their system, and to understand that that system is connected at all levels. So a child is an active participant in their school, their community, their home life, which all influences their culture. When we take this ecological perspective, what we're doing is removing ourselves from that deficit lens and saying something's wrong with that child, to saying there are some things in their environment that are impeding on that child, and what can we do to help them? So using this perspective allows us to make cultural adaptations to evidence-based intervention. Here's how. This is the Ecological Validity Framework. This is my favorite framework to utilize to make cultural adaptations to interventions. It was developed for students with the idea of Latino students, Latinx students. However, I love it because it gives you 8 elements that could be applied to any racial or ethnic minoritized background. All right. So for example, when we talk about language, they say, what language are you using in your intervention? Is that language culturally appropriate? Is it relevant? One of my favorite things when I was during my tenure collaborating with the School District of Philadelphia, they gave me a list of term analogies that the students utilize within their school settings, including things like bull and John and all these other words that they utilize that help us to understand that culture. So when I was working with the young males and in a particular setting, I'm integrating some of that language to allow them to kind of feel a little more connected to that intervention. One of my favorite things when I utilized this story, I was working with some 8th graders to equip them on how to do a socially emotional intervention for their younger students, like kindergartners and first graders. And what one of the boys did, he just adapted his whole language, his whole experience to his lived experience to help these students learn. So it was a breathing exercise where they were belly breathing. So he started describing a day in Philadelphia. So let's say you're walking down the street and you see some trash and you smell it. So you're like, and you breathe it all in. That was his way of culturally adapting an intervention, but using the language. So I loved it. That's also an example of the person that we're utilizing. Who are we utilizing to implement that intervention? Do they have the same ethnic or racial background? Do they have the same similarities? So how are they different? And how can we leverage those individuals to work with those students? We can also look at the metaphors, the content that we're using. Is the content aligned to their cultural values and their knowledge and their tradition? How can we utilize the metaphors, our popular saying, or our terminology to increase and maximize that effectiveness? How we're leveraging the concepts that we're using to really support the content in our intervention. The goals, are these goals for you? Are the goals for the student? Because lots of time we make goals for we want them to reach and it's not pertinent to them. For example, we may even do things like local goals or school level goals to maximize our intervention. What do you want to reach? What's going to be important to you is a different way of assessing that. The methods and the context. Look at your methodological approach. What methods are you using? Are you integrating their learning styles? Are you modeling these things? As well as understanding the context in which you're working in. Some schools are limited by their resources, their personnel, various contextual factors. So you have to be aware of the context that you're working in and adapting the interventions to work with them. I remember doing some of this work during my tenure when I'm doing small pull-out groups in a closet because the school didn't have any other room, but we made it work. And that was the students' favorite part of the day, where they got to work in this little space on social emotional skills. But given the context, I didn't use that as a barrier. We talk about how can we adapt this intervention to meet their needs. So within our research, just even looking at language, one of my favorite scholars, Janice Jones, talks about how language is a transmitter of culture, where certain language they use gives us an indication of their cultural identities. We even know from the research for our emerging multilingual students, integrating their native language in instruction maximizes that effectiveness. We also see fewer dropouts. We also know that when we use culture and linguistic knowledge, this could be a bridge for our curriculums between home and school to where they're speaking to each other and not so separate. For our Black students specifically, we can take that ecological variable model and look at the content. The research shows that if we're integrating Afrocentrism into our interventions for our Black students, it's very, very effective, which means that we're taking a perspective of Africa as the origin of human civilization and using that to promote the values and customs and the beliefs of our African-American students to ensure that these interventions are speaking to their own needs and helping them to navigate an oppressive system. Our research is showing when we take this little content and add this in there, we're seeing a host of outcomes such as sense of direction, relationship skills, and future accomplishments. So when we're talking about our culturally responsive practices, here are a few that you can do. First, we can acknowledge students' culture. At the bare minimum, acknowledge their culture. I see you goes a long way. We can use variety of instructional strategies. That's why I love this symposium, because you are learning various reading strategies that you can go back and utilize. But now I'm going to teach you how to implement culture and center it into those interventions. We also can have opportunities for students to create links between their reading and their prior knowledge, which shows that maximizes that instruction. We can utilize authentic and positive portrayals of characters. If you're working with Black males specifically, and you know the negative stereotype exists as angry and aggressive, well, let's show them positive Black males who do not depict that, and utilize that to show that there is a wide variety within just one identity. So I provided these for you into your resource package that you all can have and utilize as well. So now we're getting to specifically what you all can be doing with those reading interventions. I'm not going to go over this because you probably know this, the big 5 beginning reading skills. They beat you this into your head in your bachelor's programs and grad school, so you know the big 5, right? So what I did was took 4 of my favorite general reading interventions that you can utilize and say, how can we culturally adapt these interventions? So what I wanted to do, instead of adding, I want to take something that you may already do or that you're already good at and say, how can we make it better? Given that we're working with minoritized students, specifically our Black students. So those strategies are ask, read, and tell, assisted reading practices, repeated reading with corrective feedback, as well as class-wide peer tutoring. Again, because I like to align what I do with the research. What Work Clearinghouse is a beautiful resource that provides you with practice guides on how to implement evidence-based practices to support various academic domains. So what they say for Works Clearinghouse to improve reading comprehension for kindergartners through third grade, they provide you with 5 recommendations that you can utilize to support that. What we're going to talk about with this first strategy is a way to engage and motivate the context in which the teaching of reading comprehension is occurring. So through this, we can utilize this ask, read, and tell strategy, where before we go into our reading, we provide the student with the book and we just give them time to touch it, to read through it, to think about what do they want to know about this particular book. Before we even start the reading, what do you want to know about this book? So what we do is generate 2 questions. Then we'll read the book. And then what we're going to do is chunk that material into smaller groups and ask them to say, what did you learn about this? Or tell me about this. After we're done, we're going to go back to those 2 initial questions and have the students answer those. It could be with a partner, it could be with you, but they're going back and using that comprehension, what they learn, to ask those questions. So here is a list of some procedures within the handout. I also provided you with another resource on a worksheet that outlined this for you on how to do that if this is a new strategy for you. It already has it there. All you have to do is implement that. Once again, we're talking about cultural adaptations. So given our settings, this may be a group intervention. It may be a one-on-one intervention. We may utilize students as a peer support intervention, or we may work one-on-one with that student. A next strategy that we can do is assistant reading practice. I love this intervention for multiple reasons. Practice makes perfect. The more practice our students have to read, the better we can maximize those reading abilities. So within this, it also allows them to work with an individual who is more knowledgeable and who can help them develop that skill. So the procedures for this, they may sit quietly with a book. They may sit with a teacher or a peer, and they're going to read that book. Just read it and do their very best reading. So what that individual who's a more knowledgeable reader is going to follow along with them and provide that feedback on whatever they're missing, whatever they got wrong, to help maximize that instruction. Of course, we're going to use praise and say how, and use that praise to motivate them to reinforce that effective behavior. So components of this, and once again, why I love this, because we're talking about cultural adaptations. So as we go through these strategies, be thinking about cultural adaptations you can make. For example, the methods. We can utilize an adult that looks like them. We may utilize a computer-assisted program. We know students love laptops and tablets, so let's not put them on there for good. We may even incorporate parents into this intervention. Once again, practice makes perfect. Not only do we assisted reading in school, but we have them do assisted reading with their parent or their brothers or their siblings or a community member that's a mentor. So once again, these cultural adaptations can be added to every intervention. Let's look at another one. This one is my favorite reading intervention because it's so easy. And once again, that practice makes perfect. So repeated reading with corrective feedback, it will allow the students to have ample opportunities to develop those fluency and reading skills. So what they do is read that passage several times and are provided with that corrective feedback. That feedback is what's super important because it's immediate. And we're giving them the tools to understand and to maximize their language by already correcting those mistakes. So with repeated readings, I've been seeing it done in my experience so many different ways, but the point is just practice. As long as they're reading it ample time. Some of the research says 3s, I have seen 4, and I've seen 5 times. I'll let you do that, deciding on the contextual variables in your setting. But the whole components of this is to provide the students with a passage. We're talking about cultural adaptation. So we're going to already provide them with a culturally relevant passage. So once again, we're not adding to what we're doing. We're centering culture into what we're doing. So let's give them a book that's already culturally relevant. allow them to read that for 1 minute, because typically what we're doing, we're assessing reading fluency. We're assessing words read correctly per minute. So that's why we like to do this for a minute. While they're reading, we're going to give them that feedback on words they misread or the words they may hesitant to utilize. And then we're going to have some type of goal for them to achieve. Do we want it to be a certain number of words read per minute? Do we want certain words read? Once again, talking about cultural adaptations, one of the things I love to do with repeated reading interventions is to add a strategy known as meet or beat. With this strategy, it allows the student to develop the goals in which they want to achieve. For example, I was working with a young Black male in 6th grade whose reading level was around 3rd or 4th grade. So what they did, we applied this repeated reading intervention. He read it 3 times. I took their average and said, this was your score. So the next time I met with him, I said, okay, you read 100 words last session. How many do you want to read today? Of course, I worked with some very, very, very optimistic students. So he read 100 words the first day. He said, I'm gonna read 200 today. And what I do is motivate him. Come on, man, let's get it. Read them 200 words. So once again, I allowed him to make the goal. And what did he do? He worked harder to meet that goal. And then when he didn't meet that goal, I still reinforced him, told him it's okay because we can try again the next day. Last one I love, and I'm gonna give us time because we know about class-wide peer tutoring. We can utilize this for sight words, spelling, various domains within our reading interventions. Class-wide peer tutoring is a great strategy to kind of take some of that off the teachers. They're doing a lot. So that's utilize those peer supports. That's why I love this intervention, because they're learning and growing together. The research shows there are so many advantages as well as disadvantages in using this intervention. So that's why I want you to practice. Within that, what we're going to do is go into our breakout rooms. There is also a link for this document that we're going to utilize that's in a Word form, but you also have access to this through the handout on the patent website. So what we're going to do is go into breakout rooms, and you're going to pick the room you want to be in based on the reading strategies. Now, there's multiple rooms for these strategies, so pick the one you want. And what I want you all to do is work together to talk about how can you utilize these elements of cultural adaptations to that specific intervention based on the contextual factors in your school. All right. So what you're going to do is when we open the breakout rooms, you're going to pick your reading strategies. You have the Google Doc. That's a Word document in there. And then we're going to come back and wrap up. We're going to do this for about 8 or so minutes because you have access to this. So I don't want to spend too much time. It's going to become homework for you all. So let's go ahead and open up those breakout rooms to give you some time.
And I think there are three rooms for each of the 4. So you can choose which of those you'd like. So it should have popped up across the bottom of your Zoom control bar, a little icon for breakout rooms. If you all click that, it should give you the option to join a room, and they're titled. So we'll see you all soon. If you need help, let us know.
Thank you all. Let's work. Remember,
here they come.
perfect. Welcome you all back to join us. Thank you. Thank you. So I hope even if you didn't get to the actual assignment of utilizing that cultural adaptation to intervention, you have this as a resource. It's late in the day. I understand you've been doing a lot, so utilize this as your resource to come back to this. Because as we indicated, what we do is want to turn this knowledge into action. Now that you have knowledge around cultural, you have a framework for making cultural adaptations. The charge is to do it. So what we want to do is by doing this, I just want to spend some time on this graphic if you have not seen it, because what we're doing, we're making cultural adaptations is try to move from reality to liberation. So when we talk about reality and we use it in terms of context of a baseball game, the reality is some individuals have resources and privileges that will allow them to be a little bit more, to have more. to be able to see more, to achieve more. So that's the reality we're living. And then some don't. They don't have the resources and the tools they need. So at one point, we wanted equality. We wanted everyone just to have equal access. However, we still see that there's still some inequities, even when we get to equality. So what we're doing is saying, let's get to equity. Equity means every student has what they need to succeed. In this image, every person has what they need to succeed based on that individualized experience. But now, given that it's 2022, I'm an early career scholar. So what I'm doing is trying to push us to get to liberation, to where we're starting to remove the barriers that are impeding every child within our educational system, because I truly believe that we need equitable outcomes for all. It doesn't make sense for a one group to experience positive outcomes and other groups are being oppressed and marginalized. That's not okay, because these are children. So what we want to do is get to liberating every child, starting with our most marginalized students, to ensure that we're getting liberation. So that's all I have for you all. I hope it's been a good use of your time. What I want to do for the remainder time is just open it up for questions and dialogue, thoughts, feedback, but give this time for you all since we're sharing this space.